Working our way through this daily bread reading that we've been on throughout the year, traveling through the Old Testament readings. You can still get copies of that, and it's online if you ever want to follow along. And this particular week, we are in the book of Ezra. Is there anybody here that doubts whether or not Ezra is actually in the Bible? Okay, I've got a couple of hands. I was wondering about that last week when I preached out of Amos. I think some of y'all probably got onto your search engine and were like, is Amos really in the Bible? Is Pastor Rick just adding books? But we're in Ezra today. Ezra doesn't usually get preached because there is a sister book to Ezra called Nehemiah that has a lot of the same events, a lot of the same timelines that are there. And people like to preach out of it a little bit more than they do Ezra, but Ezra is just fantastic, and I'll tell you why. It's a comeback story. Anybody else here love movies that are comeback stories? They're always inspiring. You know, somebody, I'm a sucker for any Rocky movie, right? You know, and inevitably, they're all formulaic, right? They all have the same thing. Rocky loses at the beginning. He trains. He comes back. He wins, right? I'm sorry if I've ruined every Rocky movie for you, but at the end of it all, you know, it's that comeback story is always so inspiring. It's always good to hear those stories or those testimonies that I've heard as a pastor of people who have had tremendous setbacks or they've had tremendous personal failures. And however, because of God and because of what God does in their lives or what Jesus does in their lives, they're able to get back up again, dust themselves off, rise up from the ashes, and become new creations in what God is doing in their lives. They're always so inspirational to hear. And Ezra, Nehemiah, and many other books in the Bible are so great because of where they start and where God takes them and where they finish. And Ezra is worth the read, if for nothing else, that it is powerful to think about the way that God works in the life of his people, and God continues to do that even today. So that is where we're going to be today. We'll be in Ezra, and we're going to be in chapter 3, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of Ezra. You're invited to read the rest of it on your own. Here we go. When the 7th month came and the Israelites were in their towns, the people gathered together as one in Jerusalem. Then Jeshua, son of Jozadak, with his fellow priest, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, with his kin, set out to build the altar of God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings on it, as prescribed in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set up the altar on its foundation because they were in dread of the people of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord morning and evening. And they kept the festival of booths as prescribed, and offered the daily burnt offerings by the number according to the ordinances required for each day. So that is the passage that we will look at today. And when we talk about this, like I said, it's a comeback story. And in this particular case, the people of Israel have been in exile. This is after the fall of Israel, the fall of Jerusalem, where the armies of Babylon have come through and just completely decimated the city of Jerusalem. They have destroyed the temple, all the walls, and they held people captive. They took them out of their homeland, took them over to Babylon, and they lived there for decades, which was probably what they thought their ultimate fate was going to be. They were going to live and die captives, and yet, because of who God is, God does something miraculous. He has the king of the time, completely foreign king, make the decision and the decree that the people of Israel can go back to their homeland. And not only can they go back there, but they can rebuild their temple, they can rebuild their city, and they can live in the land of their ancestors. And that was completely unexpected to them, I'm sure. And they get sent back over there, and when they arrive, it's worse than they thought, right? They probably all had an idea of how things were going to be, but the temple has been destroyed. The walls of the city are in ruin, so they feel defenseless. Their homeland, all of the farms would have to be started again. Everything would have to be started again. Completely devastated, completely ruined, and this is where they are left at. Whatever optimism they had, whatever hopeful expectations they had about how things were going to be when they got back home were probably pretty disappointing. And so they have to come up with a way in which they can begin the process of rebuilding and restarting. Some of y'all have been through stuff like that, whether it is something that happened to your house or happened to your family or happened to your career. You know that situation. You start from basically nothing, or you are starting over again. And this is where they were. And they needed something that would give them hope, that would give them promise for the future. And so they began to rebuild. And there were a lot of options of what they could start with. And they choose to start with, in verse 3 of our passage today, it says this: they set up the altar on the foundations because they were in dread of the people of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord, right? I don't know, where would you start if you were rebuilding an entire city? Would you start with the walls? Would you start with Starbucks? Where would you go, right? Where would you begin with? Dunkin' Donuts? Okay. Where would you begin with? They said, we're going to start with worship. We're going to begin with worship. And they begin to place an altar. They build their altar, and they begin to receive offerings for this altar. And in this particular case, it is burnt offerings, which is exactly what it sounds like. They would get animals from the people, and they would put them in the fire, and they would be completely consumed by the flames, right? Burnt offerings. And this was not, hear me, church, this was not an obligation. This was not a duty that these people had. It says very clearly in the passage, these are what they were offering out of thanks. And you're thinking, why would they give animals up? They don't have cash, right? They don't have crypto. They don't have anything that you and I are used to offering up. They didn't have a kiosk in the back or GiveWesley.com. Their whole currency, everything they had was in their livestock or in their crops. Those are the things that you could trade back then. And God had given Moses the law and said, these are the animals that you are to offer as sacrifice. And if you think it's kind of strange when you're placing your offering in the basket on Sunday morning or however you contribute to the church, just think about what it would be like to show up at your place of worship with a cow or a goat, right? Or if you were broke, you would bring a pigeon or a sparrow, right? That would be your offering. And that would have been odd, right? You could look around at your friends, and if the Joneses had bought a cow that day, you'd be thinking things are going good for them, right? And then there'd be many of us that would be walking up like, I'm not sure this sparrow is going to be quite enough, but that's what I got, right? I'm bringing that to the temple today. That's what my offering is going to look like. And you would give that over to the priest, and they would take it. Your sins would be forgiven, and it would go as a burnt offering. And so that's what they are up to. They are freely giving it over, right? And if I had so many memories about my dad as I worked through this passage, because I still remember that when we would go to church and my dad, the offering time would come out, my dad would take his wallet out and he kind of flipped through the bills he had. He'd go past the 20s to the 5s to the 1s, right? And he would it would be like he'd had to get vice grips to get it out of his wallet, Are y'all hearing me at all today? He really struggled with the offering, and then, he would put it in the offering plate. It was almost like, no, come back, And, if it's that much of a struggle for us some days, to make our offering, to give our gifts, just think about how difficult it would be if you brought in your 4-H project for the year, right? You were like, I have raised this thing since I got it from Tractor Supply. I have had it since the day it came into my barn, and now I'm handing it over. I've fed it, I've loved it, I cared for it, made sure it had everything it needed, and goodbye, little friend. I'm giving you over to God, right? How difficult would that be? And yet this is what these people did. And it gives a very clear explanation, as strange as it sounds, right? As difficult as it sounds, I want y'all to pay attention to the power that it has for these people. It says that they set up the altar on its foundation. This is where they would do the offerings. Why? Because they were, what? in dread of the people of the lands. They're afraid. They're terrified. They don't have a wall to protect them. They don't have an army. They don't have any kind of security. There's probably all kinds of problems that they're facing. You read other passages that are going on, like in Nehemiah, there's a lot of internal struggles that happen. There's a lot of problems that occur along the way. And yet they said, we're going to make this a way in which we say things are different now. We're going to use this offering, this sacrifice, this burnt offerings. We're going to use this as a way to say things are not how they used to be. Back in Babylon, we couldn't have our worship. Back in Babylon, they worshiped other gods. Back in Babylon, we didn't have anything that was ours. Things are different now. We need to worship. We need to offer up all that we can to make a difference in the life of our people and give thanks to God. You think about the difficulty of their situation, that they're afraid of other armies, they're afraid of other towns, and yet they're saying, we're going to put our whole trust in God. We're going to give of what we have in order to make sure these offerings continue, the sacrifice continues, and we're going to do it every morning and every evening, right? And there's a brilliance to this. There's an astounding piece to this that I don't want y'all to miss. And it's just simply saying that the people are working together in order to help one another move in the right direction, They are working together to make sure that they're all moving in the right direction together. That each family was bringing their offering to make sure that each morning and each evening there was something that the priest could offer to God. Every morning, every evening, they would be able to notice and have awareness that they were giving over an offering to God. And it wasn't just them, it was the other people in Jerusalem and the surrounding villages that were contributing to this, And it was a can't miss thing. Why? Well, have you ever burned meat? Does it smell good, church? Are y'all even awake? Have you ever lost that hot dog on the grill, right? It smells for quite a while, right? And this is what's going on. They can all smell it. They can all notice that they're contributing and making a difference in the life of their community for worship. And that is what gives them hope, that they're all in worship of God. They're all contributing, all making a way in which God is pleased with their offerings. And when that burnt offering would go up, they would say, that's a pleasing aroma to God, right? Let me ask you a quick question. This is personal, so don't answer it out loud. Is your offering, your contribution to worship, a pleasing aroma to God? Is what you are contributing to the life of the community, is what you are offering when it comes to your time and talents and gifts and witness and all that you contribute to the life of the community, is that pleasing to God? Because it's never about amount, it's always about, is it your best, right? Is that pleasing to God? Are you giving your best? When it came to the burnt offerings, it had to be a perfect animal, one without blemish. You couldn't bring your dollar store discount bargain bin animal. You had to bring your best, right? And offer that. And that when we read this passage, it's the same thing, that these are people who are offering their very best in hope and their expectation that God was always going to outgive them and bless them in amazing ways. So is your offering, your contribution pleasing to God? Are you giving God your best? Later on, when Jesus is there with his disciples in the temple and people are giving their offering, it's not the people who are splashing lots of coins into the collection plate. It's rather what that one lady who's got her 2 pennies, her 2 coins, and she is the one that Jesus singles out and says she gave her best. She gave out of her poverty. Other people were not doing the same. Is it a pleasing aroma to God? The other part of this passage that I find so useful is that they were doing it daily. You know, we're good Methodists. We care about what we do with our daily lives. It wasn't just something that they did on occasion or showed up a couple times of the year, but rather their worship, their offering to God, their giving of their best was something that they did on a daily basis, morning and evening, it says. That they were doing their best to show each other and say, we are a community that has been set free. We are a group of people that have been redeemed and brought out of Babylon and brought out of so many things, and that God has protected us and watched over us and blessed us in powerful ways. And we're going to make sure that each day we spend some time thanking God for that, giving God gratitude for that. And if these people who have lost everything and who are facing difficult situations in their life can do that, then surely those of us who have been blessed even more have so much more that we can offer in our praise and our worship as well on a daily basis, right? So when you are thinking about your own life, if you are trying to start over or start something new, you know, it may be that you are new to the faith, or maybe this is a moment where you realize, like, I really need to become more like Jesus. I really need to become more like Christ. I recognize and I see in my heart and my life I need to be more loving or more kind or more forgiving, and that is such a struggle for me, and you are wondering, how is that even possible? I would point you back to passages like Ezra and so many others that say, are you giving of your best toward God? Are you doing that on a daily basis so that you can see the progress that God is working in your heart and your life? Are you contributing to the life of the community? Are you volunteering? Are you helping? Are you showing up to make a difference in the lives of others who are in the same kind of struggle that you are, right? So that it is a pleasing and wonderful aroma to God when we gather together, when we celebrate.